the Senate had a stronger position on this bill, and I'm glad to see that there are some limits on that local units of government will have, we should give our local elected officials more power to limit or allow access to cannabis as they best see fit from receiving feedback from their constituents. At the end of the day, our counties, our cities, local law enforcement, they're going to be the ones who are dealing with the impact of legalized recreational marijuana in their communities, and they should have more say on how this is rolled out in their communities. Another piece that I'm also concerned about is the illicit market taking even a stronger hold here in Minnesota. One of the issues that I see with the current bill is that the dates don't make sense. We will be effectively taking away a lot of the tools that law enforcement have to go after illegal drug sales starting this summer. Even though we've heard from the bill authors that we're unlikely to see an up and running functional department to issue licenses and having a legal market for more than a year, perhaps 18 months, and perhaps even longer. So in that time, when I talk to members of the law enforcement community, they're concerned that they will have a black market fill that void, and it will be even more challenging to get it under control, even when the legal licenses are issued. One of the other concerns that I have, Mr. President, when we look at this bill is just how complicated the new licensing structure will be. I believe we have 16 different licenses within this bill. The fiscal note indicates that once it's fully stood up, there'll be more than 100 employees at the Office of Cannabis Management, and I worry that the structure is going to create an unworkable system for Minnesotans. One feature that I think will also be problematic and could potentially be unconstitutional is requiring license holders to have a labor peace agreement as a condition of their license. And lastly, Mr. President, one of the concerns that I have with this bill is that effectively we're asking Minnesota taxpayers to subsidize the recreational cannabis market. When we look at some of the grant programs that are in here, whether it's Can Train, Can Navigate, Can Startup, Can Grow, it's all public taxpayer money that's going to be going into subsidizing the recreational cannabis market here in Minnesota. And when I talk to Minnesotans that are in favor of legalizing cannabis, I think they're talking about decriminalizing it and having a simplified structure that allows for legal cannabis to be sold, and that's not what we're seeing in this bill. We're seeing a complicated structure that's moving too quickly before we have the safety precautions in place to keep our community safe, while also ignoring the requests to have more local control over this in our communities. And so, Mr. President, even though I appreciate the work of the bill authors on this bill, I do feel that we were rushing it in this last week. I think we should send it back to conference committee for some more work to make sure that it's ready to be passed into law.
Senator Klein.
Mr. President, on the Rasmussen
the real life effects of drug abuse. If they've ever seen somebody that's overdosed on drugs, and I've listened to the arguments on this, that marijuana is not that bad, or marijuana doesn't kill people, but these are all false arguments, and I've seen it. One of the other things I've seen about people that use drugs, and many of them started on marijuana, is they can't see around them the effects of it. They may be experiencing some of those effects themselves, but they can't see them in other people, they can't see them in themselves. And so it's hard to get through to folks who don't know the condition that they're in, and that's part of the drug abuse, that's part of the addiction. It's why it's so hard to get people who are involved in drug use to understand that they need help. Many times until it's too late. I have seen a lot of this. I've seen it from the time I was young. I've seen it where folks started out using marijuana and moved to other things that were worse. I've seen it ruin lives. I've seen it where it's led to suicide in some cases. Destruction of families, the horrors that parents go through, and yet here we are. One of the main things government is supposed to do in its supposedly limited role, which we're trampled on in this session, is protection of the people. And this bill is not going to do that. This bill's going the other direction. I have so many problems with this, and as it was stated a little bit, that this bill isn't just legalizing marijuana. This bill is promoting it. It's promoting the use of it. It's giving money for startups. And as we talked before, it focuses on low-income areas. And it gives the impression that trying to stop drug use is somehow racist. That's putting these dispensaries, or whatever you want to call them, in low-income areas is going to somehow bring justice. I think it's the most horrible thing that you could do. I don't know why you'd want to do that to any community. And a lot of the low-income communities already have problems with substance abuse. And now we're saying, yeah, we see that you have some substance abuse problems here. Let's just put some drug dispensaries in your area, and I guess that's going to cure it. I don't understand this. I do not understand what we're doing here and why we're doing it. We're going to people that take an illegal drug and asking them what they think. And they say, we should legalize this, and okay, let's go ahead and do it. It's going to be a massive chore trying to keep this out of the hands of juveniles, of kids. I've heard the arguments on the other side that these things aren't
can tell you what it's like to be put through hell as a parent. I can tell you what it looks like to see your kid completely strung out on drugs and unrecognizable and lost and empty. I can tell you what it's like to expect the only phone call that I could ever receive is that they're either
high dose or use that for youth, especially in young males, the frontal cortex decline or impact on development, which is showing now a significant increase in psychosis in young men, more so in men than women. And a lot of it's harder to treat than a serious meth addiction or some serious heroin addiction. I know many parents that I've talked to. I've got a couple schoolmates where their children are in that. They don't even understand or recognize them. The paranoia, the schizophrenia, that psychosis sets in, and they're also paralyzed. They're trapped. They're in a prison in their own home, desperate to try and save their children. It's a powerless feeling. It's a horrible feeling. Like Senator Green said, we're not only moving this forward to say, hey, we want a regulated environment to be able to bring cannabis. I think there is a high demand. I think the studies are right. Most people say, yeah, we think we should just get the government out of the way. That's not what this bill is. We've decided that we're going to promote it so much, we're going to force cities and municipalities to have these facilities, to have legal drug dealers in a licensed shop where licenses are only going to be offered to a limited and select population. In many cases, I think there's been some work done, but the enforcement still is going to be by a brand new state agency, adding hundreds of new people. And the ultimate licensing decision authority appears to be onto that new state agency. Sounds like another version of preemption that I thought this body was against. To not have enforcement. If we made those same proposals for alcohol shops, that, yeah, we don't want any enforcement in the alcohol shops. I've listened to the recordings of Minnesota's Ready, that they literally stated, we don't want law enforcement or any oversight anywhere near these facilities. It's an all-cash business, by the way. What could go wrong there? We wouldn't do it for tobacco shops. All we hear is we do. The local authority gets involved. My understanding in this bill now, they can have an opinion, but their opinion isn't going to be, or their decision-making is not going to be the part that drives any enforcement on that particular license. There'd be some bureaucrats from St. Paul who don't know what our community is and don't know what the impact is going to be on them. I am happy that the medicinal cannabis is preserved for now. I never understood the outright attack on that industry who's spent millions of dollars trying to provide a good, viable product. It's proven to have worked for many people. That's why we expanded it. to make sure and try to make sure it's affordable and accessible. But along with that medicinal side, recreational just doesn't replace that or provide an opportunity that parents are suddenly going to be the person who's going to try and understand what the best product and dosage and utilization is for somebody in their family or themselves, especially if it comes into a minor child. That should be under the guise of a physician. So I'm happy that there's some changes made in that. But I'm not happy that from what all the cannabis, or not, I'm sorry, but the hemp providers and the CBD providers, that because they are not from an area, I don't know what the term is today, but a over-prosecuted area. In committee, we asked if there's a map that shows where that is, or individuals that have been prosecuted or incarcerated or charged and convicted of a drug crime. That'll make many of those or put them out of business if they can't get a vertically integrated license to grow, manufacture, and retail. There's no viable business model. And I think it sounds like we're okay with that. We'll just put those very successful businesses who operated under a federal law that made it easy. Did they stretch what I think the legal definition was? I do. But I also think there's a massive demand for that product in light of what's happened to our healthcare system and the lack of trust and people looking for holistic products. CBD is one of them. That I've heard many stories, many personal stories about people that said it's worked so well, from joint to sleep to whatever it is. I think that's going to grow. But sounds like we're okay with putting them out of business because they just didn't buy their way in to a seat at the table. So, Mr. President, I think there could be actually some bipartisan support if this bill actually went back and got rid of the things that are most divisive. Not even sure part of it's going to be constitutional when you exclude a whole host of people from being able to apply for a permit. Much like any business, any permit or application, everybody should be equal and everybody should have an opportunity. It's a business license. If we applied the criteria that appears to be in this business to all businesses, it'd be chaos and anarchy. And I don't think it'd ever stand up to the Constitution. So I think it should go back. I think you should go back and take out those pieces that are most divisive. Make sure it has a great, solid regulatory environment that puts local control back in place. And to treat it like all the others. I think the one thing that we were working on, I was working with Representative Edelson. We have so many laws that are in place that are a direct analogy between tobacco and alcohol that was a framework and a structure that probably could have reduced this bill to 50 pages at the most and have a solid regulatory environment and provide opportunity for those that want to enter in that business, but provide the safety in every aspect, from consumption to the viable product. I think many are confused if in the small micro business. It's a little bit different than a brewing or distilling. But to grow medically or to grow a commercially viable product, to make sure the herbicides, pesticides, most of them are not going to be in controlled air environments. A lot of external influences there, mold, fungus. To have the expertise and the remediation services available to make sure that's a safe product. Again, I think that's another shared goal of everyone's. I'm not sure this bill gets there. And so, Mr. President, with that, I think that this bill, I support the amendment to re-refer or to, re-refer to the committee, Senator Jordan Rasmussen's motion, and I urge a green vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Uckey.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I too support the motion to return this to the conference committee and take care of a lot of these issues that we're going to hear about going forward. But I'm going to start out with some questions because looking quickly through the bill, There's some things that I've got questions on. So, Mr. President, if Senator Port would yield for a question.
Senator Port, will you yield for a question? Senator Uckey.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Port. On page 7, I flipped my pages the wrong way.
And Senator Uckey, as you're looking for your paper, I'm giving Senator Port permission to sit and give answers because of her medical condition. Okay, Senator Uckey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, as I'm looking through here, and it's been brought up, but we haven't dug into a little bit. On page 7, we have the division of social equity, and I'm wondering what leads to that, because as I just kind of look at what the high notes are, it says that it promotes development, stability, and safety in communities that have experienced a disproportionate negative impact from cannabis prohibition. I see that as they didn't have cannabis and we're saying they were negatively impacted. Is that the truth?
And Senator Uckey, before I call on her, what page were you reading from?
I was on page 7.
Page 7. Senator Port, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Uckey. No, it doesn't mean that they didn't have cannabis. It means that they experienced a negative impact from the prohibition, from the war on drugs that has existed. Cannabis prohibition is not the absence of cannabis, but the illegality of cannabis and the harms that it has done to our communities.
Senator Uckey.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Port. And if she would continue to yield, I've got
Senator Port, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Uckey.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, I skipped ahead a page, flipped a page to page 9, and we get into the labor peace agreement, and again there with the description, an agreement between the cannabis business and a bona fide labor organization, and it talks about protecting the state's interests, prohibiting the labor organization from engaging in picketing, work stoppage, boycotts, etc. Can you explain why that would be a problem?
Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Uckey. Yes, this exists in several different industries. In this case, it's particularly important for the medical cannabis program. Patients across Minnesota rely on medical cannabis, and picketing and work stoppages can be a danger to, getting medication out to patients when they need to. So labor peace agreements are pretty standard in industries like that.
Senator Uckey.
Thank you, Mr. President. And if Senator Port would continue to yield.
Senator Port, she will yield.
Okay.
Senator Uckey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, I now jumped ahead to page 20. We list the Cannabis Advisory Council. It's got a couple pages plus of possible members. What do we anticipate as far as a total membership of that council?
Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reading the numbers on the page, it looks like it's got about 38 different folks who can be put to it, who can be who can be on the advisory council. A couple of them have more than one, so I think it's around 45, but I don't know the exact number. You could count them up.
Senator Uckey.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. And yeah, I saw a lot of different categories or options for people who could serve, and I just wondered if there was a targeted amount or if it was all inclusive. So we're looking at a quite a sizable group there. And then I got, okay, another question. If Senator Port would yield.
Senator Port will yield. Senator
Okay.
Uckey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, I'm now on page 31 where we get into the home cultivation of personal use cannabis. And the part that I see there, it talks about the number of flower or plants and the adult plants, etc. How are we going to police that? Because we've had a lot of conversations in the last number of weeks here where basically we've got the legalization here, and in our public safety bill we've have backed off on a lot of the law enforcement for these type of things. Do we anticipate this actually being policed and somebody looking after how many plants are really growing?
Senator Port to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Aki, you know, I imagine that will vary from community to community. I will also say that, like many other things, it's when a problem is raised, that's when an investigation is done, when enforcement will look into it.
Senator Aki.
Thank you, Mr. President. And that follows up with a probably my final question at this point anyhow. So if Senator Port would yield for an additional question.
She will yield. Senator Aki.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, I know there's something in here, and I wasn't able to find it quickly paging through it, but related to local control. As far as our local small cities, if the city wants to opt out of having any retail or anything within their city limits, are they able to do that?
Senator Port to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Utke. The answer is a little bit, it depends, but mostly the answer is no. There's not prohibition allowed in this bill. A city may not completely prohibit cannabis licenses from being in their bill or offered based on this bill. What does happen is there are limits to them. So a city must allow at least one cannabis license, retailer license, for every 12,500 residents. If a county, if there's not a city of that size in a county and one license exists in the county, or at least one per 12,500 people in the county, a city that does not want another one, or a different city that doesn't have one in that county, does not need to authorize that at that point.
Senator Uckey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Port. And I'm going to go one step further with a little bit of clarity for the people. I come from, and I guess if she would yield for this additional question.
Senator Port, will you yield? She said she will yield. Senator Uckey.
Thank you, Mr. President. The district that I come from, I believe the largest town in my whole district is about 4,250 people. I've got a lot of small towns. So would every small town, or could they have one in every small town, or would they be forced to have one in every small town, or is there a county-wide limit so that if if we've got 4 of those little towns, but yet the county population doesn't equal 2 of the 12,500 population counts that you had, could the county limit those numbers?
Senator Port to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Uckey. Well, I imagine the biggest limiter in that case will be the market demand. If there's not a demand, people aren't going to open businesses, and if there aren't enough people, there's not going to be a huge demand. But yes, in that case, if the cities don't reach 12,500, the county can limit it at 12,500.
Senator Uckey.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Port. I've just got some follow-up comments, and I've talked on this when it came through the first time, and it has to do with all the problems and challenges that we have ahead of us, and the problems being serious. It's a gateway drug in most cases that typically we see lead to stronger drugs, drugs that are more dangerous, and a lot of problems down the road. We've seen what other states have experienced, and I don't know why we have to bring this to Minnesota. Other states have shown The arrests in our K-12 school system are incredible. The number of kids getting possession and bringing it into the school and then being arrested jumped right through the roof. Traffic violations are up. Traffic accidents increase. Mental health goes up a lot. And homelessness. We already have a huge mental health and homelessness problem in our state, in addition to the other things I mentioned, and we're just going to add to it. I think this is completely ill-advised and the wrong thing to do. We hear about the illegal market. The illegal market, black market, whatever we call it, is not going anywhere. It more than likely is only going to increase because it makes it easier for them. We have got a lot of problems ahead of us, and this is just, I don't know how to put it other than it's just totally the wrong thing to be doing at this time. There's, and you know, personal opinion, but absolutely no upside and a whole lot of downside bad stuff. So with that, Mr. President and members, I would ask that we support the Rasmussen motion to return this to the conference committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, whether you're in favor of legalization of cannabis or not, I think as you read this bill, you can find a lot to be concerned with. Public safety has been a continuing concern. While we know there are impaired drivers already on the road using cannabis, my fear is that it's going to get worse. Mr. President, if you look at a report by the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, they state that since recreational marijuana was legalized in 2013, traffic deaths where drivers tested positive for marijuana increased 138%, while traffic deaths in Colorado increased 29%. Since recreational marijuana was legalized, traffic deaths involving drivers who tested positive for marijuana more than doubled, from 55 in 2013 to 131 people killed in 2020. And since recreational marijuana was legalized, the percentage of all Colorado traffic deaths involving drivers who tested positive for marijuana increased from 11% in 2013 to 20% in 2020. Now, as you know, I have a connection to Colorado, and as it's the state that's had legalized cannabis for the longest, it seems to be one of the best places to start. When we talk to the proponents, they say, well, this will be good for controlling cannabis, and I think there's some mixed information there. Past marijuana use for ages 12 and older, or marijuana use in the past month for ages 12 and older increased 26% and is 61% higher than the national average in Colorado. The good news, Mr. President, is that it did decrease for kids aged 12 to 17. It decreased 22%, but is still nearly 40% higher than the national average. Mr. President, we see increased suicide rates. The percent of suicide incidents in which toxicology results were positive for marijuana increased from 14% in 2013 to 29% in 2020. And we've been told legalization will eliminate the black market. Mr. President, the organization I mentioned, and it's a long name, but the Rocky Mountain high-intensity drug trafficking area basically states that it's conducted 294 investigations of black market marijuana in Colorado, and that they're seeing an increase of 48% from an average of 174 parcels from 2009 to 2012 when marijuana was commercialized to an average of 257 parcels from 2013 to 2020 during the time it's been legalized. Mr. President, from my comments last time, I tended to focus on local control, and I find it rather interesting that we have a section in the bill called local control. Senator Port, would Senator Port yield for a question?
Senator Port. Oh, she's off the floor right now? She's off the floor right now, but we do have Senator Umu Verbaden or Senator Murphy who can certainly fill in because they know about this bill as well.
No, thank you, Mr. President. I'll wait.
Senator Pratt, I prefer not to wait because I think she is off the floor right now, if you can read in between the lines.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Mr. President, I think I'd like to be able to come back to my questions for Senator Port specifically.
You can certainly
since
do
there
that.
have been significant changes in the bill from the point in time resulting in local control from the time it left the Senate to the time it's come back in the conference committee report.
Senator Pratt, may I suggest we could certainly reserve those questions for when Senator Port comes back, but Senator Umu Verbaden has worked alongside her on this bill along with Senator Murphy. Oh, she's here now.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Port yield for a question?
Senator Port will yield for a question, Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr.
As soon as she
President.
gets settled, but you can go ahead and ask the question, sir.
Mr. President, reading between the lines is not always my strongest suit.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, you just mentioned to Senator Uckey that there were some changes in the number of licenses that a city is required to allow. When it left, cities of the first class were required to have a certain number. Cities of the second class were allowed to provide for 2 and then an additional 1 for every 10,000 people over 45. Can you help me understand again how you've come up with the new formula?
Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Pratt. Yes, this was just a simplification. The House had no restrictions, and we worked with the cities and counties, the associations, to come to a simpler formula that sort of took very close to our position, but just raised the number to 12,500, 1 for every 12,500.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Port yield for another question?
Senator Port will yield, Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, one difference I seem to be seeing, and I wanted to clarify with you, when the bill left the Senate, I don't believe municipal cannabis shops were allowed. Are you providing for municipal cannabis shops in the current bill?
Senator Port to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. As far as I understand, they could apply for a license just like anyone else, but it's not specifically called out.
Senator Pratt.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I continue to be concerned about this. You know, when I look back at Colorado, 70% of communities have decided that they do not want licensed recreational cannabis in their communities. We allow those city councils, to have that control, that authority over their local jurisdictions. And Mr. President, there's some data behind that. There's a study out of the state of Washington, and the study that while there's a significant decrease in property values in neighborhoods next to dispensaries, and just a brief, if you'll indulge me just for a second, the study resulted in an estimation that while there were not statistically significant impact on overall crime rates, nuisance crimes around dispensaries increased, but drug-related crimes decreased. Increased nuisance-related crimes, therefore, may be one contributing factor to depressed home prices in areas near dispensaries. A marijuana dispensary decreases property values by 3% to 4% for homes within roughly a third of a mile from the retailer, a decline of $10,000 to $15,000 based on the average home value in the state of Washington. So, Mr. President, we allow cities to decide how many liquor stores they want to own, but we don't set a minimum. I suppose the city could say, we don't want a liquor store. I do know that there's a community in my district that has said we don't want smoke shops and vape shops. But not with cannabis. With cannabis, we're not going to allow our local cities to make that determination. We're not going to let the residents of those cities say, you know what, we're concerned about our property values. My home is the biggest investment I have. I want to protect that investment. It could be someone who's renting. They don't want to see the value of their investment drop $10,000 to $15,000. It could be because we'll have a hard time finding people to live in those neighborhoods because if nuisance crimes are up, they're going to be afraid to let their kids outside to play. Mr. President, we also have a number of expenditures in this bill. Now, we could say it's one thing to lift the restrictions, lift the prohibition on cannabis, but this is a bill that goes even further. It goes to promote the industry. It provides for startup loans. It provides for startup grants, grants that don't need to be repaid. We have training grants because we have to have people to work in the cannabis shops. And so, Mr. President, we have $2 million each year going to a program called Can Startup to help businesses open up new shops. We have $1 million each year ongoing for Can Navigate to help businesses navigate the law. And then we have $3 million a year for Can Train, which are grants to either for-profit or nonprofit businesses to do these trainings. It could be a $20,000 grant to an individual. For a total of $6 million each and every fiscal year ongoing. The taxpayers of Minnesota are subsidizing this industry. Mr. President, you and I have talked about food deserts in the past. In fact, I believe in your jobs bill, you allocated $250,000 to help train grocery store workers. $250,000 to train grocery store workers, $6 million each and every year to support and subsidize the cannabis industry. Money to help start up a cannabis business, but where's our grant program for someone who wants to open up a grocery store in a neighborhood that we've decided is a food desert? Mr. President, there isn't one. $125,000 a year we're helping grocery stores, $6 million a year we're helping the cannabis industry. Mr. President, I lay out these concerns with the bill because I support Senator Rasmussen's motion to reject this report. When you look at these concerns laid out, and there's a lot of good in this bill, I'll actually admit that. I would support, I agree with many of the provisions in this bill. But Mr. President, when we take away the ability of our cities to determine which types of businesses they want and which they don't, when we tell local communities certain neighborhoods are going to see a drop in their property values, and you don't have anything to say about it. When we tell these communities, don't worry about the increase in nuisance crimes, that's none of your business. When we subsidize an industry and not a basic need like food and groceries, members, where are our priorities? And I have to wonder why we're even bringing this bill up tonight when we still have budget bills to pass before the constitutional deadline. So, Mr. President and members, I strongly urge you to send this back to the conference committee. Members, I strongly urge the conference committee to listen to the concerns of local communities. And let's not preempt and presume that every community needs a cannabis store for every 12,500 people that live there, when we can't even get grocery stores in areas where we have food deserts. Mr. President, let's send this back and let's get it right.
Senator Drahan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I appreciate the discussion tonight on all the bills, and I know this is a very popular bill, a bill that a lot of Minnesotans are looking forward to, and I have mixed feelings on the bill. But when you look at this 300-page bill, 300-plus page bill, it does a lot more than just legalize marijuana, Mr. President. It creates a whole bunch of new agencies. It funds a whole bunch of agencies. It expands government. In this bill, according to the spreadsheet, there's expenditures for the agriculture, attorney general, cannabis expungement board, the cannabis management, commerce department, corrections, district court, education, employment and economic development. I think Senator Pratt just got talking about some of the programs under that. A whole bunch under the health area of our budget, Office of Higher Ed, Human Service, Labor and Industry, Natural Resources, Pollution Control Agency, Public Safety, even Department of Revenue, Supreme Courts, and the U of M. I don't know if we missed any. It's almost everything. We do collect a tax, which we have seen in every single bill this year, Mr. President, is a new tax. That's how we raise an extra $10 billion with a $19 billion surplus. We're growing government, bill after bill after bill. We're growing our spending, almost 40% more in the next biennium. But that's not what really concerns me with this bill. I was in the hospitality industry for over 20 years. And I've had a liquor license. I've had multiple liquor licenses for multiple establishments. I also at one time had a tobacco license. There was quite a process to go through to get those. And it was up to my local communities to decide what and when I could sell. That is gone in this bill. There is no option for local communities to decide what is best. It's very ironic for me, being here only 7 years, to have the majority who has pushed tobacco law changes to reduce the amount of kids smoking and the big push to get rid of flavored cigarettes and menthol cigarettes are the same people that are promoting this marijuana bill. Very ironic. It blows my mind. Another big piece in here, because I have kids, I worry about their safety. I have a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old. They're both going to be on the road pretty quick. In fact, my 14-year-old turns 15 here in about 10 days. There's no court-tested drug test on the market. There are developing roadside tests, like a breathalyzer for alcohol, but there's nothing that's been tested in the courts, Mr. President. We're just not ready. Another provision in here is the timing of legalization. We spent half the day yesterday talking about a bill that wasn't going to take effect until 2026 because we weren't ready. I would argue this bill needs just as much time. There are some good provisions in here. I thank the author for her hard work on this bill, but it's not ready. The timing of the public safety funding does not match when this will be implemented, Mr. President. It's time to send it back to conference committee and adjust the dates. I'm worried about the spread of illicit markets or illegal markets. And why I'm concerned about that, Mr. President, is mainly fentanyl and the lacing of other drugs in the marijuana. I'm sure you see it in your day profession when you're not here. It's a real problem here in Minnesota, and I think this is just going to expand that problem. And I would ask Senator Port to yield for a question, if I could, Mr. President.
Senator Port will yield. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, have you traveled to cities that have legalized marijuana recently, like Las Vegas or San Francisco?
Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Draheim, I recently traveled to New York, yes.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you. Well, I haven't been to New York, but I have been to Vegas recently and other cities that have legalized it, and I have smelled marijuana from quite a distance. Senator Port, will you yield for, Mr. President, will Senator Port yield for another question?
She will yield. Senator Draheim.
Thank you. Do you feel that in your bill, and I'm looking at page 38, members or public, if you're paying attention, it's House File 100. I'm on line, page 38, line 15. You talk about in your bill here about how far a city can regulate the distance between daycares and parks to shops that sell marijuana. And having been to Vegas and smelling that all over the place, we have in this bill, Mr. President, a little over a football field. That's it. Do you want your kids that close to a marijuana shop? Have a daycare within almost a little over a football field? Senator Port, my question would be, how did you come up with these measurements to protect our kids?
Senator Port will yield. Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Draheim. We worked with the House, also with the cities and counties, to allow a reasonable distance, similar, in fact, greater in most cases than the distance that a liquor store is allowed. And I will also just add that I didn't have to travel to New York to smell the smell of cannabis. You can do so right here in Minnesota because people are already using cannabis in Minnesota right now.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Port. I find that answer incomplete. People are also using fentanyl. Just because people are doing it doesn't make it right, especially near our kids. And drinking, you can smell alcohol on someone when you're within a few feet, but a little over a football field, you can smell the smell of marijuana and most likely seeing illegal activity happening. The other concern I have when we're talking about protecting our children with this bill is the sale of edibles, Mr. President. And I would say once a month I read an article about drug overdoses and the appearance of some of the drugs that look like candy, like a lot of edibles, gummy bears. What do we have in this bill? Mr. President, will Senator Port yield for another question?
Senator Port will yield. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, is there anything in here to protect our children from edibles or drinks with flashy marketing if they go in or someone hands them some gummies or an energy drink or something to protect our children?
Sorry about that. Senator Port.
Thank you, Senator Champion, President Champion. Yes, Senator Draheim, I'm getting the page number, but yes, there are restrictions. It cannot resemble a candy like a lollipop. It cannot resemble, let me find the exact page. It cannot have marketing that is directed towards children, similar to the restrictions that we have on cigarettes and advertising. It cannot have packaging that looks or resembles something that is marketed towards kids or is a product that is sold to kids. It can't, for instance, resemble Doritos or fruit by the foot or anything like that that's marketed towards children. And it has to have it has to be marketed not towards children. And the Office of Cannabis Management has oversight over packaging and warning labels that go on the packaging.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Port, for your answer. Once again, I find it ironic, Mr. President, that the same people that fought against tobacco and raised the limit of tobacco and are trying to make it illegal to purchase menthol cigarettes The same people that went after the cartridges for vape pens, which I supported, reducing and raising the level or the age of tobacco, Mr. President. But I find it ironic that the same party that pushed all those are now going to expand this level 1 drug. The next thing I would like to do is ask Senator Port for one last question.
Senator Port, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Port, and thank you for being patient with me. I know it's late. I don't remember, Senator Port, is there anything in this bill that prohibits municipalities to having their own shop?
Senator Port, I believe that was asked earlier, but my good friend wasn't here. Senator Port, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. He wasn't here, and I do have a page number now. Page 81. Yes, municipalities are allowed to have their city or county may establish, own, and operate a municipal cannabis store subject to the restrictions in this chapter. It's on 81.4.
Thank you, Senator Port. Mr. President, just a couple more comments.
No problem there, Senator Draheim. Go ahead.
Thank you. We have something that we use in real estate, and I hope Senator Port took this into consideration as she was drafting this bill. We have something called quiet enjoyment that is implied in every tenant to use their apartment, or every homeowner in their home, some peace and quiet, more or less, to be able to enjoy their property. And I am very concerned about this with the marijuana, with the smell. My apartment, Mr. President, up here in St. Paul, I would say 2 out of 3 nights smells like marijuana. And I'm not able to enjoy my apartment because of it. And I have family members, Mr. President, that are very sensitive to smells. I have a sister that is very, very sensitive to smells. And I worry about people like her, and I don't think this bill addresses it. Mr. President, there's just too many questions. Would have been really easy to draft a bill to just legalize marijuana. Have a phased-in approach, one that collects a whole bunch of taxes like this, but doesn't spend it all. A bill that wouldn't mandate to our cities that choose not to have this in their community or want to wait until law enforcement is trained in. This bill doesn't do that, Mr. President. It legalizes it right away, and we'll wait months, if not years, for our local law enforcement to get trained in updated recommendations from law enforcement. So with that, I urge a yes vote to send this back to the conference committee, and thank you for your time, Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, stand to support rejecting this conference committee reporting and sending it back. I've talked about this before, and the more I've listened to, I've tried to keep an open idea on the pros and the cons, and I still come down to some of the same ones we've heard here tonight. Number one, the testing. I think the testing has a ways to go, and that concerns me, especially in court, what will happen and what our local cities and counties will have to go through to prove and go through the testing in the courts. I think that's going to be a huge issue. Obviously, the safety is a big thing as well. Senator Pratt hit on a lot of my points and did a very good job of them. But coming from local government, I was planning commission, city council, mayor, as you've all heard many times before, local control. And when I was involved in city government, we did have alcohol, which I held a liquor license as well for our family bar that did a business for 92 years. And we also had a tobacco license and did compliance checks. And that was something myself as a city council member we did. and we did those compliance checks. So I'm concerned to hear that the cities cannot do compliance checks. That's the one thing that our local control should be able to do. I agree with some of the location issues of being where they want to be located, how they influence property values as being an appraiser in real estate. That's a huge concern. Another concern, promoting the business of cannabis. So as someone said, $6 million a year, we're going to spend money promoting cannabis, which we know has health effects, we know has mental health issues, and yet we're going to promote it. And we're going to spend $6 million a year, and we can't find money for rest homes to protect our senior citizens. It's priorities. Priorities that the Democrat majority has chosen to pick. It's frustrating. And sooner or later in the next couple days, you'll hear probably somewhere in the news that the minority tried to hold up and go into special session, and yet we're spending time on bills like these, voicing our concerns, which are huge. But again, we'll probably be blamed because we're trying to hold things up. That's not what we're doing. We have concerns. You've heard about them. But yet we're going to spend time and time again on policies and things like marijuana and pot, and this is a budget year, and we have to get a budget done for the year, and we're spending time doing this. And we're not stalling. We have a lot of concerns. There's a lot of concerns on this bill, but yet we're going to get blamed. We know it. You can see it already. The workforce issues it's going to create. Folks, we already have a workforce issue in Minnesota getting people to work, and if you think this is going to help that, you're wrong. This is not going to help our workforce issues. I'm out and about in our community. I listen to a lot of people, truck drivers, equipment operators. All these things are going to be affected by this, one way or another, because of testing, what's allowed, what's not allowed. Is it in your bloodstream, is it not? Is it contributing to a factor that caused an accident or not? Lots of issues, you know. And we're growing government. We're adding people, growing government to promote the sale of pot in Minnesota. It's changed, I tell you. Something I never thought I'd see happen. But we are actually growing government here to promote the sales of pot. Someone else talked about it. The other party, the Democrat Party, has been a strong person that's trying to promote flavor bans, menthol, the issues with smoking, and yet they're going to turn around and spend hours and hours and hours trying to promote pot. To me, that sounds fishy. In a way that we've heard a lot of people are promoting this, not so much within the legislation, not with our members, but Minnesota Ready. We've seen the campaign stuff. We've seen some of the things they've done to promote this. One card I saw, there was a suggested donation of $10,000 to give your input on legalizing marijuana. To me, that's pay to play. So we're getting people to pay to promote this here in the state of Minnesota. Senator Graham also hit the enjoyment of your home and the smells. I've been to Vegas, I've been to Colorado, I've been to Nashville. It's overwhelming. And yes, it's happening now, but by legalizing it, we're further going to promote it. We're spending money to promote it, $6 million a year to promote it. Doesn't seem very smart to me. And finally, my biggest concern is we're making access and the acceptability of this to our young children across Minnesota. We're making it, we're promoting it, and we're making it more acceptable for our young children. The mental health issues, as I've been on the bonding committee for 6+ years, is one of the biggest things we heard across the state are the mental health issues we have and the need for more mental health institutions. And folks, this is going to make it worse. We're doubling down on making more issues. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be another 33, 34 party line vote tonight. Maybe it won't. Hopefully someone in the majority will step up and say, no, this just isn't right. It doesn't pass the smell test. No pun intended. But please, if you're on the fence and you're thinking about this, think about our small kids across the state. Think about the safety. Think about the liabilities. Think about the workforce issues. It goes on and on and on. Folks, reject this. Send it back. Let's not push this through this year. Let's work on it. Let's get it better. This bill deserves to be done better. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. President.
Senator Howe.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And I'm not a big fan of this bill. But if we were going to do this, Mr. President, I would have thought we would do it without the huge bureaucracy that we're going to build to make this, to pass this bill. The bureaucracy is amazing of what's going to be going on with this. The amount of people that the state is going to have to hire is going to suck up any profits that we see. I mean, you got 16 different licenses. I would have thought that if we're going to legalize it, let the locals license it. Let the locals do the same thing they do with the liquor stores. We have a model. We could have followed that. And with that question, I do have a question if the good Senator Port would yield.
Senator Port, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Port. When we talk about the model that we have out there with our liquor stores, we have municipal liquor stores, and you've answered the question on whether the county or the city can get with some of those licenses, but I know that in this bill, there's kind of priority folks. Some folks get ahead of the line. Is there any priority, or is there any way that cities and counties can kind of control, like they do with municipal liquor stores? Can they control that they get first in line to get that license in their city or their county?
Senator Port to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, there's not.
Senator Howe.
So would the Senator Port yield for a further question?
She will yield. Senator Howe.
So, Senator Port, is that the Cannabis Control Board or whatever the heck that's called? Do they determine who gets the license?
Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, through the application process that the Office of Cannabis Management overseas, they are the ones who go through the licensing process.
Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think that's something that should be addressed. I think that if I do believe the lack of local control here is a concern. I think they should be able to do compliance checks. I think they should be able to do their zoning. And I think they should be able to determine whether they want to sell marijuana in their city or their county or not, just like they can determine whether they want to have a dry county or not. And I do believe if they want to have a municipal distribution of marijuana, that they're the ones that make that determination, and they should have that control. You know, the safety issue is one of the biggest things I have with this, and I know that there's a pilot program in here for the testing. I do believe that we should put this thing on hold. We develop whatever you want of the bureaucracy, all the rest of this stuff, which I'm concerned about, and I still think we should make this a lot simpler. But I do believe we should make the effective date of this and delay it until we have some data and a way to test folks for driving while impaired on marijuana. I think once we do have that testing capability, I believe that our law enforcement folks would not be so opposed as they are today. And I know this has already been brought up by Senator Jasinski and others, but you know, we've made a big deal about tobacco and smoking and making sure we get our kids and keep our kids from smoking and using tobacco. But yet we're going to use this and we're going to send a mixed message to our kids saying this is okay. Because they're going to see everyone doing it. And as if you know kids, well, everybody's doing it, can't be bad. So I don't think you should be putting any of this stuff in your lungs. If you can imagine if tobacco's bad for you, I can only imagine what this stuff does for you. So, members, I don't think it's heart healthy, I don't think it's lung healthy, and I don't think it has, we've already got it for medical purposes, and I think that's fine. But for the common everyday public, everyone that I've talked to in the states that have already approved it tell me to delay it. They tell me to delay it as long as possible because the social cost and the damages to your kids far outweigh any dollars that you're going to take in, any tax revenue that you're going to take in. And I will say that we're not going to get a whole lot of tax. We're going to take in a lot of tax revenue, but we're going to spend it all in the bureaucracy that we're going to run to do this. I think there's a lot of simpler ways to do this. I think we tried to do way too much in social engineering on this thing. And members, that's why I say vote green on the motion to send this back to conference committee.
Senator Abler.
Guess we're moving along. Thanks. I made quite a few comments, Mr. President, as this bill left, and I don't think anybody is hoping I repeat all that, but I don't think I can just sit here and then watch this go. Just without offering a few parting thoughts as the promoters of this bill to legalize marijuana move forward and celebrate their victory. And so, well, good for you all. You've been working on this for a while, and it's. But I just want to caution people, and I want to remind the promoters of this thing that there's two groups of people that we need to think about. One group of people are people over 25. And people who were 40, and there was a fellow at one of our hearings who said he had 10 dabs this morning, and he was a 50-year-old guy, and he's used to it, and nothing bad's going to happen to him much more than it's not a big deal. He's used to it. This is what he does, and makes his day, works it out. But there's a second group of people, Mr. President, and it seems like nobody's thinking about that for the ease of convenience. And in the committee, when this came to us, I made an effort to raise the age to 25 because the people under 25 are an entirely different population, particularly those who are under 21, particularly those who are under 18, particularly those who are under 16 who are going to be using this because they use it today. And you don't have to sit through very many hearings, Mr. President, on substance use to get the idea that there's some people who run afoul of this. You don't sit through very many hearings, Mr. President, to meet a mother who grieves the loss of her son or her daughter, who ran into this thinking it was nothing, and they were so psychotic and so mentally challenged that their life, that it seemed it was almost irreversible. And if you think that's just some old guy standing here taking away your fun, Mr. President, it's not necessarily fun for this group. There is a certain entertainment element to this, like, oh, I feel so good now, but it's not nothing. And the people who are going to be supporting this at the age of 21, which I think is a grave error, and I did my best to push on that, and it's amazing, Mr. President, how the vote changed from 1 week where I would have had a 5-3 vote in favor of going to 25. A little blizzard came along and a little discussion in the back room, and suddenly it got down to the other way around failing. It's amazing. So the bill is clean, Mr. President. It's 21, so simple, just like alcohol, just like so many other things, just like going to buy a cigarette. But Mr. President, this is not alcohol and it's not a cigarette. Neither of those are good for you, and I'm not going to tell you not to smoke or not to drink, because people are going to do it anyway. But I can tell you the 18-year-olds who are misled by the enthusiasm of the authors and the promoters of this thing, and those of the marijuana party and the libertarians and how cool it all is, are misleading those individuals. And some of those individuals are going to find themselves in grave harm. And there's discussions about the size of the bureaucracy and what about the cities, and all those are all legitimate enough. I'm not going to spend 1 second on those except to mention that there's other concerns. But at the end of the day, Mr. President, some relative, and I pray it never happens, but some relative of somebody who is gleefully using this is going to get a hold of it, and they're going to be really sorry. Some 11-year-old, some 15-year-old, and if you read anything on the research, no one refutes, Mr. President, the synapses of these immature brains under 25, and particularly under 23 and 21 and 18, are very sensitive to harm from this stuff. Not so much the old stuff, but this new stuff is not nothing. And I believe the proponents are sick of hearing this. And sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry, because in the career I'm in, which is healthcare, watching the harms that happen to people who make choices that they could have avoided, and listening as a former chair of a committee for 6 years, listening to the grieving words of a mother who is here to try to save one more person from this happening to, because her child is gone. On behalf of those folks, I am telling you this. And so to the sellers of it, to the people who are going to share with your friends, the people who are going to vote for this thing, I want to remind you that the ill effects of this are not unforeseen. And it's not just some old guy warning you not to go have fun and to enjoy your youth, but to say it is not nothing. And I don't know what else to say, Mr. President, but I'm not speaking one word of untruth. And even though the people on Twitter like to say, oh, what do you know? Go ahead. Laugh at the truth. But, Mr. President, my conscience will be clear because I tried. I tried to make it 25. And it should go back to conference and make it 25. If you did some of that stuff, I might actually vote for this thing. But the way it's going to be set up here, and I'm cautioning the authors and the proponents and the people who think this is going to be the best day of their life when this passes tonight. Mr. President, for some people, if you're old enough and you're durable enough in your brain, have a good time. And we shouldn't criminalize it. I just want to remind people, I had the bill for decriminalizing a couple of years in a row with Representative Gomez, and we couldn't get any traction on it. So I don't think we should be criminalizing this and going after people in some kind of racial disparate way, or any group of people that should be treated differently about this. That's a problem that can easily be fixed without going to this extent to make this available to middle schoolers. But I want to just, if you're the big brother and you're able to get this, tell your kid brother and kid sister, don't do that. So that's all I got, Mr. President. And so I pray that nothing I'm saying comes true, and that no one comes to harm, and everybody is like so wise that everything I said could have been true, but won't. Members, I urge you to vote green on the motion to re-refer.
The Secretary take the roll on the motion to reject the conference committee report. Members, please vote. Senator Bowden, for those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report that Senator Mann votes no.
Senator Mann votes no.
Senator Rest votes no.
Senator Rest votes no.
Senator Fateh votes no.
Senator Fateh votes no.
And Senator Dietzick votes no.
And Senator Dietzick votes no. Senator Hur, are you going to vote? Senator Jasinski, for those voting under Rule 40.7. Just let me know when you're ready, Senator. Senator Jasinski, those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Housley votes aye.
Senator Housley votes aye.
Senator Liskey votes aye.
Senator Liskey votes aye.
Senator Miller votes aye.
Senator Miller votes aye.
Senator Nelson votes aye.
Senator Nelson votes aye.
Senator Weissenberg votes aye.
And Senator Weissenberg votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There being 32 ayes and 34 noes, the motion to reject the conference committee report does not prevail. We are now on the underlining motion. The secretary will take the roll on the motion to adopt. Members, please vote. We're on the motion to adopt. Senator Bowden, for those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Mann votes aye.
Senator Mann votes aye.
Senator Rest votes aye.
Senator Rest votes aye.
Senator Fateh votes aye.
Senator Fateh votes aye.
And Senator Dietzick votes aye.
And Senator Dietzick votes aye. Senator Jasinski, for those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Housley votes no.
Senator Housley votes no.
Senator Liskey votes no.
Senator Liskey votes no.
Senator Miller votes no.
Senator Miller votes no.
Senator Nelson votes no.
Senator Nelson votes no.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Weissenberg votes no.
And Senator Weissenberg votes no. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There have been 34 ayes and 32 noes. The conference committee report is adopted. The secretary will give the bill its third reading.
House File Number 100, a bill for an act relating to cannabis, establishing the Office of Cannabis Management, establishing an advisory council, etc.
Third reading, Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is not a bill that I really have a great deal of passion or desire to have a lot of depth of understanding around, but I have seen it in a couple of committees. I've seen how quickly it has been brought through the legislature. I've seen a captive group, special interest group, that is formed, even with the notion that it's that there are memberships almost to the group that were being charged, as I was being told. I don't know if there's anything true to that. I really haven't gotten real close to this bill, Mr. President. But the way that this bill has been almost quickly and shoddily put together during this session. It's a huge bill. It creates a brand new, huge bureaucracy, and certainly we should have taken much more time with this bill than we did. This should have been done over 2 or more sessions before we brought a product to the floor for the people of Minnesota to entertain. I'm looking at the bill. I'm wondering if Senator Port would yield for one question, Mr.
Senator Port, will you yield for a question? She will yield for a question. Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Port, I did see on the fiscal note of the bill that in the first biennium that this bill anticipates spending of $144 million, and that in the next biennium that's more like nearly $200 million, $188,194,000. How many FTEs are we buying with all of that tax money?
Senator Port, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Drazkowski. I don't have an exact number of how many FTEs are required. That varies throughout the various agencies that have pieces of funding throughout this bill. You're welcome, I guess, to go through the 150-page fiscal note and add them all up, but that is, I don't have a number on that.
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Port. Well, members, we don't know how many FTEs that these hundreds of millions of dollars in tax money that this bill is going to once again extract from the good people of Minnesota. With a brand new program, a huge bureaucracy, the Office of Cannabis Management, we can add that to our vernacular here, members, as we come back next year to look at maintaining and directing and fixing and understanding and auditing another great big bureaucracy in this runaway state government that we do have now. I did see in the bill, and I heard other people talk, 16 different license types. I think that, Mr. President, really frames the scope and the ambition of this bill and the members who put it together and their vision for this great big bureaucracy. And there are 3 pages of different licensing fee categories in the bill. Members, if you look on pages 35 and 36 and 37, I mean, they range from $500 to, gosh, I should have counted them up here. Members, there's got to be 30 or 40 different levels of fees. The highest fee, $70,000 for a medical cannabis combination business. The renewal license fee of $70,000. I'm wondering if the author would yield on this one, Mr. President.
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr.
One Senator Port to yield. Senator Port, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Port. So help us understand how this works. The renewal license fee is $70,000. I'm on 37.10 through 37.13 on the bill, Senator Port. The renewal license fee is $70,000, but the initial application fee is $10,000, and then the initial license fee of $20,000. If I add those together, it's $30,000, Senator Port, but then a renewal license fee of $70,000. That seems counterintuitive and really opposite of the way we normally see things play out. Usually the renewal license is a fraction of the original upfront license. Can you explain why that is?
Senator Port.
Thank you,
to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Drazkowski. Yes, we set this up specifically to allow for entry into these various businesses, as you alluded to. There are various different sizes of business that you can go into, and we kept the entry to that as low as possible based on the size of the fee. And then once the business is up and running, the fee goes up a little. And on the medical licensing fee, I will note that it is significantly lower than our current medical license fees that currently exist in the industry that we have set up right now, because we do expect more people to be able to join this industry. We want them to be able to join this industry. So the fees have gone down.
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Port. So, members, it sounds like we're going to, in the bill, give them a lower fee, which $20,000 for an initial license seems like a huge pile of money, Mr. President. And so we're going to get them in, and they're going to get on their feet, and then we're going to zap them with a fee that's 2.5 or 3 times as much as the original fee. And you know, as I look at this, I've got constituents in my district, and Senator Port, you and I have talked about this some in committee, and I'm sure other members have. We have these, we have edible hemp manufacturers and edible hemp retailers out there who have become established under current law, Mr. President, in our state. They're operating in a business that doesn't have any of the dangers that this bill and the concerns with the higher potency marijuana that are included in this bill, and yet we are still going to charge them huge fees, not quite as huge as the one we talked about. These are hundreds of dollars and thousands of dollars, $250 and $1,000. That's still a lot of money for a very small business. And additionally, on top of that, of course, we have the net receipts tax of 10% that's going to be placed upon these existing businesses. We've got the original local or the original state sales tax of 6.875%. On top of that, we are going to smother these small businesses that are already operating under the law without the additional marketing lures that some of the novelty of this, of the higher potency materials would otherwise provide, Mr. President. So I've talked to these folks, and you know what they're going to do in response to this, Mr. President, members? They're going to leave Minnesota. A recurring theme, like we've heard bill after bill after bill that has come here, Mr. President. People are getting out of Dodge in this state as we continue to pummel them with more and more taxes, more and more regulation. And here, a bill before us which, as I see us doing things in the legislature like this, we think we're bringing in something that is going to somehow make a problem worse, or make a problem less worse, excuse me, or less, it's getting late, Mr. President, less severe. And in reality, this bill actually even contemplates that we're going to need more money for law enforcement, local communities. We're going to need more money for drug recovery and treatment and some of those things. It's contemplating problems in building that money into the budget in order to pay for the societal ills that it itself and the policy deliver to the people of Minnesota. And when we do that, Mr. President, I think we need a very stern moment of self-reflection. And we need to ask, if we know these bad things are going to happen because of the policy we're putting forward, should we really be doing it in the first place? I encourage a no vote on the bill, Mr. President. Members, Senator Port, thank you for taking my questions. I encourage a no vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, we have a couple of people that's on the list, and I want to ask you to be as thoughtful as possible to get right to your point, if you will, because I'm a little concerned about our staff, because there are those who have work to do even after we leave. So if you can be thoughtful about that, that would be helpful. I'm not trying to chill debate. I'd like for you to say whatever it is that you want to say, but if we can be thoughtful about that, that would be helpful. I'm now going to Senator Grutenhagen.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I think we see a lot of concerns with this bill in terms of local control, not having any local control, one-size-fits-all mandate by the Democrats onto our communities, and the taxpayer subsidy of the promotion of cannabis to our young people. But I just want to bring out one perspective, and that's you know, we hear that pot isn't addictive and that pot users aren't violent. That's the claim that the pro-pot people use all across this nation. Well, members, we just had released one of the most extensive studies on the use of cannabis in the history of our world, actually. It's called the Association Between Cannabis Use Disorder and Schizophrenia Among Our Young People, and it causes brain damage. Basically, the study covered 5 decades, that's 50 years, members, in the making, with 7 million people. So it wasn't a small study, 5 decades and 7 million people. It was just released this month. It was done by researchers from the Mental Health Services, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and the National Institute of Health. And they made these conclusions. So cannabis is both addictive and pot users can be very violent. That's what they concluded. And they suffer brain damage at a young age. That's what we're promoting in the state of Minnesota. Secondly, there's severe medical consequences that come along with the use of THC. And I'd like to quote from a doctor in Colorado. Her name is Dr. Karen Randall. She's an emergency physician in Colorado. She says that the condition scromitting, if I'm pronouncing that right, cases were very rare several years ago. Now she is seeing at least once per day. What is scromitting? It's a shorthand for screaming and vomiting at the same time, a condition that inflicts patients who use marijuana with high concentrations of THC, the psychoactive substance in cannabis. The condition is much what it sounds like, screaming from nausea and vomiting at the same time. That's what we're promoting to our young people. So you think you're going to get tax revenue out of this, the exhaust and addiction and the consequences in society will eat up that tax revenue other than the people who are selling it for. And by the way, legalizing marijuana does not, in California or Colorado, eliminate illegal sale of marijuana, because the illegal marijuana is much cheaper than the legal because of the taxes and the regulations that go on the legal. The other thing that comes out of it is the cartels move in, they raise illegal marijuana, and then they sell it into the states where it's still illegal. So again, that's the direction we're pushing this state. I don't think it's a better future for our young people, and I did 13 years of jail ministry and saw the devastating consequence of illegal drug use and the exhaust it causes on their lives. So members, I encourage a red vote. Please vote red if you care about our young people.
Senator Umu Verbadian.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to just start by thanking Senator Port for all of her work on this bill and for involving me and all the co-authors as partners from day one. This bill has always been about ensuring that the folks most harmed by the cannabis prohibition benefit from legalization. And we know that Black Minnesotans are 5 times more likely to be charged for a cannabis-related offense than white Minnesotans. 5 times more likely. That's wrong. It's a racial injustice, and this is our opportunity to actually right those wrongs. So we do that by expunging records immediately, and to the folks who received those convictions or had family members that were convicted of using or selling cannabis, you deserve to be at the top of the line for the licenses. Others don't just get to skip ahead when you're the ones who lost jobs and you lost housing and educational opportunities. You are the ones who suffered from prohibition, and we're just not going to let folks profit off of this new market before you. This is really our opportunity to get this right, and I'm really proud of this bill because it centers the folks who have been harmed the most. So members, I encourage you to do the right thing and vote for this bill.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I want to stand up in opposition to this bill. I really think this is going to harm Minnesota like nobody understands. We've heard a lot about it. I've listened to a lot of people talk about how much money this is going to raise for Minnesota and how much money is going to be raised, and a lot of things will be spent on mental health and many, many other things. It's not going to raise extra money for the state of Minnesota to build roads or bridges or education, those things. It's not going to do it. Secondly, I'm hearing a rumor now, and it's coming from some of the lobbyists, about the tax bill and what the tax bill is going to do, and they're going to pull e-pull tabs. They're going to change e-pull tabs huge. I know I'm on the bill, I'm going to get to that point if you give me 1 minute, miss. So we're going to promote businesses to sell marijuana, but then in another bill, we're going to penalize all the people that have set up e-pull tabs, our local nonprofits, our bars, our restaurants, our Elks Clubs, our Moose Clubs, our American Legions, our Knights of Columbuses, all our local nonprofits, Main Street organizations, football associations, wrestling clubs, lake associations, all these people that are benefiting from e-pull tabs right now. From what I understand, the tax bill is going to strip all that away, and in reverse, we're going to start promoting selling dope. Think about that, members. Think about that. We're going to pass a marijuana bill tonight to promote the sale of marijuana and pot, and in another day or two, we're going to pull all the e-tab revenue from all our businesses across the state of Minnesota, all our nonprofits, American Legions, all these people that I know you've all gotten emails from your local businesses on what this is going to do. If COVID restrictions weren't enough on these industries, now we're going to pull e-pull tabs and sell pot. Something's wrong in Minnesota. Thirdly, not one law enforcement agency, not one law enforcement person will tell you this is going to benefit our state. Not one. And we're disregarding them all here tonight. I don't know if anybody's heard, law enforcement, I bet they haven't, that this is going to make Minnesota better. Let's ignore our law enforcement like we've been doing for the last couple years in this state from the leadership of some of our cities. That's what we're doing. We're saying we're not going to listen to law enforcement. They don't know what they're talking about. We're going to promote the sale of pot. Finally, we have 3 days of session left, and we're spending time on bills that don't have to do with the budget. We still have the transportation bill, budget bill. We've been having conference committees. We've got some good policy things done. We haven't even seen the budget on transportation yet, and it's 3 days left. The HHS bill, haven't seen that yet either. The tax bill, I hear it's coming out. We haven't seen that yet either. The bonding bill, we've seen some forms of it. We haven't seen that yet. And yet, on Tuesday morning, the majority is going to complain that we slowed things down and couldn't get things done. And we're spending time tonight on this issue while we could be working on budget bills. Folks, vote against this. Vote no.
Aaron McQuaid. Senator Aaron McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I think this is a bit of a weird conversation. There are thousands of Minnesotans across the state who are tuning in to watch us debate this and are hearing things that are just not true. They've legalized adult use cannabis in 22 other states. There have been research projects done. They have shown that crime doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. Transportation accidents don't go up, they don't go down. What happens is we legalize adult use cannabis, and adults use it responsibly. We legalize it, we regulate it. The illicit market goes away. We educate young people on how to not use it and adults on how to use it responsibly. This is a really, really thorough bill for a really, really bipartisan, across party line, across the state, popular issue. So I'm really proud to be supporting this bill. I'm proud of the work that Senator Port has done, and I really think it's time to get it across the finish line. I want Minnesotans who are watching this to know that at least half plus one of the people in this room understand that this is a racial justice issue. This is an issue that is important to Minnesotans, and we're going to get it done for you. Vote green.
Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, I want to thank the bill author, Senator Port, for always being open to feedback. We oftentimes didn't agree on the bill or different amendments that we discussed, but I always appreciate her being open to conversations. Mr. President, members, I believe one of the fundamental flaw with this bill is that the starting point of it from proponents has been about creating an industry to fit their ideology. And just take a look at the bill. Take a look at what it spends its time talking about. It talks about peace labor agreements. It talks about having bonus points for applicants who have committed drug crimes previously. It limits the scale of cannabis businesses and vertical integration. It has 16 licenses, canopy limits, energy and equity reports. And I think that's really been the focus of the conversation, what the proponents of this bill have been focused on. Mr. President, I think we would have had a much better product before this body today if we would have been focused on harm reduction and harm mitigation. If we would have started this bill from a place of how can we make sure that we can best address the public safety and public health needs of Minnesotans. I'll give a couple of examples. In this bill, there's a 2-ounce possession limit. Many states, including Colorado, have a 1-ounce possession limit. Law enforcement wanted lower limits so that they could help crack down on the illicit market, but that was turned away. You can have up to 2 pounds in your home. That was another thing that law enforcement expressed concerns around as they try to eliminate the black market, even under this bill. In addition, when it comes to public health, while I'm grateful that there will be studies and there's funding for the University of Minnesota and the Minnesota Department of Health to look at the impacts that cannabis use will have on young Minnesotans, on Minnesotans of all ages, it seems like it was a tack on. And when we're looking at some of the safety features put in this bill, a lot of the decisions were driven by commercial interests. You know, what types of products did they want to sell? What types of THC concentration did they want? And it wasn't by listening to public health professionals, by medical professionals, and thinking about what's actually best for the health and well-being of Minnesotans. I think, Mr. President, it's really interesting that we're taking this bill up on the same day that we debated the Human Services Bill. And I think Minnesotans would agree that we're currently in a public safety and a behavioral health substance use disorder crisis. And this bill in its current form, I think, unfortunately, will make both of those items worse. Next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, we're going to have cannabis fix-it bills because we decided to rush this through in the final week and not take the time to get it right, to think through all the implications of this very complicated bill that the proponents have put a lot of time into. And I think that'll have unintended consequences for Minnesotans. when I talk to Minnesotans who are in favor of legalizing recreational cannabis or decriminalizing it, this isn't what they're talking about. They're not talking about setting up an industrial structure that fits an ideology. They want it to be decriminalized, and they want to make sure that it's safe. A common misconception that I hear from a lot of Minnesotans is that this will bring in tax revenue, the pot for potholes argument. And I'll actually give the proponents of this bill a lot of credit for basically saying, no, this bill is not really going to generate money for Minnesotans. And I have concerns that it won't even cover the costs of legalization when it comes to substance use disorder and public safety needs. Another misconception is that just by simply legalizing recreational marijuana, we're going to eliminate the black market. And when I talk to law enforcement, both in my community and across the state, they're concerned that this will make the black market worse, because while we are setting up the structure for legal cannabis, we're at the same time taking away tools that law enforcement have to go after illegal drug sales here in the state. So, Mr. President, we have a choice. We have a choice to say no to this bill tonight, to take the time to get it right, to put Minnesotans' public health and public safety first, or we can rush into this and we can have a gold rush on cannabis here in the state of Minnesota and focus on the commercial interests of the proponents that have been driving this bill from the start.
The bill author, Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, thank you for the discussion tonight and for your engagement in this bill over the last 5 months as it's been through pretty much every committee and had ample conversation. You know, I've heard a few things tonight that we've heard throughout the year and that I think are rational feelings, right? It is rational to be afraid of this. Change is new and change is hard. And people are talking about fear for their kids, which as a mom is something I understand deeply. And the best way that we can protect our kids from access to cannabis is by legalizing and regulating. This is an adult use cannabis bill, which will be sold in 21 plus locations, just like we sell alcohol. It is available to our kids now. The system that we have right now is not working. It's not achieving any of the goals we're setting out for. It is a public safety risk. It is a health risk. It is a risk to our children. It is not currently working. If we had a way to solve this with law enforcement, we would have done it. So it's time to try something new. In states that have legalized, what we've seen is the age of the first use of cannabis by youth goes up. Because there is education, because there is carded access to it, the age of first use by youth goes up. Kids are older before they try cannabis for the first time. In Montana, 80% of cannabis sales are now in the legal market, and they've only been legal in Montana for a few years. In Washington, it's 83%. We can get rid of the illicit market. And one of the strongest tools we have to do that is to not allow for areas of prohibition to continue to exist in our state, which is why our bill does not allow for that. The war on drugs has had devastating, harmful effects on our communities. I am incredibly proud that this bill has the Can Renew portion of it that reinvests in communities that have been directly harmed by prohibition. It is a critical part of this bill. It is a necessary part of this bill, and I'm really proud that it is a key part of this. To Senator Rasmussen's point that we will have cannabis bills, fix bills, every year going forward, it's been 100 years since we've had liquor prohibition, and we still have liquor bills here. You're right, it's a changing industry. We're going to have fixes, and I look forward to working with you on them, as I've enjoyed working with you on this bill. Lastly, you know, we've heard a lot about promoting the use of cannabis. We invest in training in all sorts of industries in this state. We have an entire agency, DEED, that invests in training and education and building out the industries that exist in our state, and cannabis should be one of those. And I'm proud that we invest in that in this bill. Lastly, I want to say thank you to all the members in this chamber, my partners in the House who have carried this bill, my staff and team that have worked so hard on this. Thank you to the advocates who have shown up from the beginning and been a key part of this. Your work is on these pages, and I'm incredibly proud that we're going to pass this bill tonight. It is time. Minnesotans are ready. Let's legalize, regulate, and expunge. Vote green.
Members, as I always say, before we get ready to take a vote on a major bill, and every bill that we vote on is important, but when we have members in the gallery as well as in the chambers, I remind you that our Senate decorum is not to applaud, it is not to scream, it is not to do anything that is challenging for our body. So I'm asking the people who are in the gallery that no matter which way that the vote goes, that if you want to celebrate, you have to celebrate out in the hallway and not in our chambers. Members, that goes for you too. All right? With that being said, the Secretary will take the roll on the final passage of House File 100 as amended by the Conference Committee. Members, please vote. Senator Bowden, for those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report that Senator Mann votes aye.
Senator Mann votes aye.
Senator Rest votes aye.
Senator Rest votes aye.
And Senator Fate votes aye.
Senator Fate votes aye. Senator Jasinski, for those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Housley votes no.
Senator Housley votes no.
Senator Miller votes no.
Senator Miller votes no.
Senator Liskey votes no.
Senator Liskey votes no.
Senator Nelson votes no.
Senator Nelson votes no.
And Senator Wiesenberg votes no.
And Senator Wiesenberg votes no. Senator Bowden, do you have more under Rule 40.7? Senator Jasinski, for those voting under Rule 40.7, you need another minute? Is that what you're saying? Okay. All senators having voted who desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 34 ayes and 32 noes, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, continuing with messages from the House, there's a message at the desk. The Secretary will read the message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the passage by the House of the following House file, herewith transmitted. House File number 2369, signed Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Members, no action is required. The next order of business is the fourth order of business, first reading of a House bill. The Secretary will read the House file number.
House File number 2369, a bill for an act relating to labor, establishing protections for transportation network company drivers.
Members, House File number 2369 will be referred to the Committee on Rules and Administration for comparison with Senate File number 2319, now on general orders. Members, we will now move to the 13th order of business. Any announcements of Senate interest? Any announcements?